Hi, everyone. This is Sebastian Traeger, Managing Director of Reliability.com, and welcome back to another episode of Reliability 4.0. As always, we're on a mission to help make the world a more reliable place. And today we are joined by guest Greg Christensen. You may have heard of him from CMMSradio. It's a really exciting podcast, and we are thrilled to have you on the show. Greg, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate you inviting me, Sebastian. I know we talked about this a few weeks back or so, and we're finally doing it. So glad to be here.
We appreciate it. Well, let's just go ahead and dive in. And I really want to start with your journey. How did you get into maintenance and reliability, and what led you to start CMMS Radio?
So it goes pretty far back. So in the 90s, so growing up, I can go back even farther. Growing up, I was in some different trades-related type jobs, working in manufacturing, working in janitorial, worked in a machine shop, a few of those different things. Fast forward into the 90s, a buddy of mine launched a company in building maintenance and janitorial services, and I helped him build that out. We did that for many years, and during that venture, we were looking for a solution to help us manage all of our job sites, the client relationships, all these different things. Everything out there just wasn't quite right. So decided to build our own solution. Now, I'd taken a stint elsewhere while that solution was being built. And then big shout out to Sean. He's watching us from above now. He said, "Hey man, come over here and help me build this software company." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "You know, that thing we built, the internal tool, we have to create a company." I said, "Oh, all right. Yeah, I'm in. I'll do it. Let's go." So we built this CMMS platform as a company, brought it out into the wild. We had all these different types of customers. We got lots of exposure to people in manufacturing, facilities management, property management, you name it, just about anything and everything, provided it met with the right style and approach for that CMMS to help them with their needs. And then we later sold that company, and I went along for the ride for a couple of years. I did what I call my corporate washout moment. And over the subsequent year is when I decided to launch CMMS Radio, because I knew a lot about maintenance management, CMMS, of course, facilities management, all the different things, constantly putting it together, doing all these different demos, helping clients launch. And I wanted to keep talking about it, stay connected to the industry. The most interesting part of launching the podcast, which was in December of 2021, I kind of did it on a whim. Hey, let's give it a try, see what happens. Kind of fun. I started getting contacted by all kinds of maintenance and reliability professionals. And I said, why are you calling me? And they're like, "You get it. You understand." I said, "Yeah, but I'm not a CMRP. I'm not a reliability engineer." And they go, "No, but you're talking about the things that matter, the foundational elements, what really makes a difference." That's how the podcast was launched. And I think what I try to do is bring in the experts to draw out their insights, their experiences, the guidance for others. Helping one person at a time is really important to me, instead of like, "Oh man, you got to get, 50,000 followers and all that." I say that's a bunch of hogwash. I just try to keep it real and stay plugged into the industry and learn and stay curious. I want people to learn something.
So on that, you kind of talked about the work you're doing now. Are you doing the podcast full time, and do you also consult with different people? How does that work for you right now?
Well, I focus on the podcast primarily, and I do some consulting. On a select basis, I'll take on projects, whether they're related to a CMMS project, something similar. And I might do something that's maybe on the fringe, maybe voice work related or something like that, some creative little projects. But I focus mostly on the podcast. I go to a few events throughout the year, and it's a mix and match, but it's really all about the podcast. I have a blast doing this. Even this right now, being a guest, which is very different. It's not the same as being a host. I just enjoy it. Connecting, talking, going on these little journeys. I love that. So I'm pretty focused on that more than anything else.
Great. Well, I want to dive more into what you've learned on the podcast and help share that. But before I do, I always like to get to know the whole person. So tell us a little bit about, your family or life outside of work. What do you do? I see a lot of Metallica shirts there. So maybe that has to do with that.
Yeah. So, let's start there. So Metallica, the shirt you see here is my newest addition to the stable of shirts. And I actually support the All Within My Hands Foundation. That's Metallica's foundation. It includes Metallica Scholars, which is really important for skilled trades, reskilling, all that. I am a huge fan, not only of the band, but of what they're doing with All Within My Hands. Since you brought it up, I got to point that out, man. I love that whole thing. I
didn't even know about that. That's awesome.
It's important to know about because they really make an impact. They really give back, and they do other things, food banks and other types of things like that. So check out All Within My Hands. As far as kind of the rock and roll element and all that, I love heavy metal. I love rock and roll, classic rock, all of it. So that's kind of a big part of my life since I was, a kid and a teenager, all the bands that come along with the 80s and the 90s. As far as family life, I don't want to get too deep into that, but we keep things pretty simple. We luckily are in a situation where I can do the podcast and I don't have to have a real full-blown corporate gig. So that's cool. Shout out to my wife for allowing that. I'm also into cars. I like hot rods and Corvettes and all that kind of stuff. A little bit of travel, not a ton. I go to the conferences and do a few things like that.
When you're in Southern California, it probably takes a lot to get you out of there. Such a nice place to be.
There's a lot of places to go, whether it's near or far. It's a beautiful state. It's got a lot of cool things you can go and do and experience out there. But I don't even know if I answered your question.
No, I was going to say on Metallica, my wife's father went to Virginia. My oldest boy is hoping to go there. Metallica, of course, that is the opening song for every football game. They play, I believe it's Master of Puppets. It's either that or Enter Sandman. I can't remember which one. But Metallica actually went and played in Blacksburg, Virginia, which obviously is not like a town that's on tours normally. They had a video, like a viral video of just the whole place shaking when they played, in their opening song. So they've done a ton for that school, I know, as well.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, I think he went to that concert. His name's Robert Latino, Bob Latino.
Okay.
I call him the godfather of the HLM high-level meeting. He did a post with the shirt from, I think it was from that particular concert, if I recall correctly. Going by memory, you can't look it up.
He's a Virginia Tech guy. I didn't actually know he went to that. That's pretty neat. Well, let's dive back into reliability and CMMS insights. You've obviously seen a lot. You've seen inside many maintenance departments. Let's talk a little bit about KPIs. What do you find to be the most misunderstood or misused KPIs or goals when it comes to reliability? As you talk to folks, what do you think are the things that are not the right KPIs?
Boy, that's a tough question because it's really hard to generalize. This is the thing I've found now with being 3.5 years into the podcast and all the years prior when it comes to the KPIs and the metrics that people are going to leverage within their organization. It kind of changes environment by environment. So what I'm learning is the generalizations are the most dangerous. I think personally, I've always thought, I just had this conversation this morning, that mean time between failures is an important metric. But if you talk to 10 different maintenance and reliability professionals, they may or may not agree, and they're going to want to know specifically where and why. Why do you think that? Because they might move off of that mean time between failures. The reason I think mean time between failures is an important metric is because it gives you at least an indication towards maybe your OEE, which is not a maintenance metric. OEE is actually for a different department. That's purely operations, if I recall correctly. And remember, I'm not a maintenance and reliability professional. So a lot of times I'm learning by osmosis and through these conversations. So I want to be really mindful of that I've got the stable of heavy hitters that you want to talk to about these questions rather than me. As far as misunderstood KPIs, I don't want to throw any of them in the trash. I don't think I'm that guy. The OEE seems to sometimes be misapplied and misunderstood. And as far as all the other metrics go, typically you're going to want to boil what you're looking at from a production or throughput perspective down to a couple of KPIs, not all these dramatic KPIs. It all depends on which department are you talking to. For me, the most important thing is not the KPIs. For me, the most important thing when it's maintenance and reliability, asset performance management, asset management, any of those things, it's always going to boil down to your fundamentals and your people and your process first, because although CMMSradio is about computerized maintenance management software, it's really about maintenance management, which is people and process. That's the foundation that you need. And that's where you can almost always look to fix any of your problems. It's not the technology. I hope that answers your question.
No, that's good. Well, and I do want to, and this probably dovetails. So as you think about, and I want to talk specifically about CMMS, and you mentioned people, process, technology. What do you think are kind of the most common challenges you see in companies when facing a rollout or optimizing their CMMS?
Number one is making sure that they're getting not only the buy-in from their team, but having their team involved well before they make these decisions to bring in technology. I think that's the big one. And then very close to that, or even related to it, is when technology is being deployed, that's where everything falls apart because people start to back off into their typical working style, a reactive environment that's trying to move away to more proactivity, and they're going to leverage technology to help with that. Remember, it's your people and your process, but the technology will then help with that. They fall back into their typical kind of behaviors. So it all boils down to behaviors. That's where those things tend to really go off the rails, is when, think of it like this. I'll just give an example. We're rolling out a new CMMS within an organization. Maybe it's a manufacturing organization, and you've got people bought in, you're doing the deployment, you get to the stage where you're putting it in the hands of technicians and other individuals to create things, get their workloads, PMs, otherwise demand repair work orders, whatever you want to call those. And they start using it, and they're interacting, and they're putting in information. And then their boss comes and asks them things that they've already put into the system. Now they know their boss isn't looking at it. Now they know that they're not spending valuable time by putting that information into the system because nobody's looking at it. They will tune out. And that's where your deployments start to fall off the rails.
That is interesting how, and I know when we think about technology, and I know there's the people process, but trying to make those work together, we try to build tools for the folks who are going to, quote, use them, and folks for the managers. And we feel that, you want the tools to be easy to use so that people want to use them. And then the byproduct of people using that should be data. But then your manager needs to look at that data to say, is this the results you're wanting? If not, how do we go back to the users and let them know what they need to change? If it is, how do we get more of that? That's interesting hearing you say you've seen deployments go awry or sideways. There's users using it, but managers not paying attention. Obviously, the stereotype is obviously the opposite, where it's like managers are like, you better use this or else. And then it just becomes compliance based, and people might do the absolute minimum they have to get their boss off their back.
That's exactly right. And that's where, when you look at how people are measured or what's expected, what's conveyed to them as far as what they're supposed to be doing, they will behave in accordance with that so that they're looking a certain way, even if they don't know it. That can happen outside of one's awareness. And there's other things that happen that can send these deployments off the rails when leadership tries to lead from behind their desk. Now, some leaders within an organization necessarily lead from behind the desk. They lead from the boardroom. They're in meeting rooms. They're doing all that stuff. But if it's maintenance related, if it has to do with the plant floor, you got to get out there. You got to get out from behind your desk. Another thing that happens is you get leadership that parachutes in that doesn't know the organization. And inside of 2, 3, 4 weeks of being there, they're getting rid of a system that the team has adopted. And then they're starting a new deployment. Well, you're going to get a lot of people resisting that because they're used to a working style. They don't want to spend a lot of time in the system. It doesn't matter how valuable it is to the organization, but if you're not conveying to your team members why they're actually supposed to be doing this, why this matters to them, not just what's in it for me, but why it matters to them and the organization, that's how you connect teams from the foundation all the way up. And it's how you integrate technology for the benefit of the organization. You have to connect maintenance to the overall organization. Otherwise, it's continually treated as a cost center. People know that they're being treated as a cost center and they won't buy in.
I like what you just said about how important it is to communicate at a high level. Here's why this is important, how it affects the organization, but also how it affects your day-to-day. So you've probably seen deployments go well and go poorly. I know I'm asking like it off the top of your head, but what do you feel like the roadmap would be for a really good deployment? How does somebody make sure we've done all the things that you just told us to, right? We've gotten people on board to take a look at it. People have agreed that we need it. We've evaluated a number of solutions. We've chosen this one. Now we're ready to roll it out. What's now critical to make sure that that sticks and actually is used in the organization?
Simple answer is to continue. I mentioned that's where it falls off. A lot of times that's the risky point, is when we've gone through this big project of evaluating and deciding and choosing and signing with an organization, a CMMS vendor. It might be an EAM system or something like that. That's where you have to turn the corner and turn it quickly. You can't let it sit. So you have to treat it like a project with accountability and milestones. And you have to have departmental representation across the board. You can't have anybody making it obvious that they don't care anymore. That's where you have to kind of double down and reinvigorate yourselves on the deployment. The important thing to understand is organization by organization, this is going to be slightly different. But if you want to generalize, you want to have a deployment plan that starts with your initial setup. You want to follow all the general best practices like setting up asset hierarchies. You want to know which assets are most critical, start there. You want to set up the facilities in a way that makes sense from a location communication standpoint, and you want to get the right people involved. I typically follow let's start with our administrators and then blossom down into our maintenance team and then blossom down into potentially requesters if you're going to have organizational requesters. And you also want to build a strong team internally for every step of that process that knows what happened, documents what happened. The vendor that's providing you the solution should be doing the same on their side, because what you're going to have happen within the first couple of months or so is you're going to need to revisit or reinforce what you've been doing so that people know this is now a normal thing. Without getting too nuanced, you really want to keep it simple. You don't want to overwhelm people. You don't want them to feel like they're being micromanaged. The system handles that micromanagement part for you so that you don't have to bother people. And that's a real thing. I don't know if anybody's really saying that. I'll tell you one thing, anybody in the maintenance department, I don't care which part of the company, nobody likes to be micromanaged. If you're working on your deployment and you're going to wail on people and not give them a little bit of room to come through and actually do the work you've asked them to do, you got to give them that breathing room. Also, don't micromanage it.
So when you think about a deployment, and let's just use CMMS for now, or just a generic solution, and let's say it's been adopted by corporate, but it's going to be rolled out to the plants. In your mind, would you coach somebody to deploy it plant by plant? Hey, let's just pick one, get them up and running, and then go to the second? Or would you coach them to deploy it? Hey, let's get one or two early adopters at every plant. What's the strategy in your mind, plant by plant or kind of across the groups?
Well, this isn't the answer you probably were expecting, but it's both. It really depends. So what's really important about answering a question like that is understanding that you can't generalize it because it depends on the organizational type. Do these plants run exactly the same? Do they have the exact same pieces of equipment? Do they have the exact same culture within the plant? Because organizational culture and plant by plant culture can have some slight differences. Typically, I would think you want something representative of the organization to deploy and then replicate. So if we go back to this old and long-standing idea that it's not going to go anywhere, this is a real thing where we want to develop repeatable processes, that would be the best way. However, if we've got a tremendous amount of similarity across locations and we don't have a lot of variance plant by plant by plant by plant, we could then start with a very high number of locations. I've been involved in deployments with, let's say, 60 to 120 locations that are all rolling out simultaneously on a unified platform.
Because there's similarities between them.
There's similarities, but then there's also the right kind of bandwidth. On that organization side, having been the vendor that provided it, I can remember working with 10 or 12 different locations all at the same time, helping with their deployments. And we could see right away the similarities and the differences, but we were in a unique situation, which is what we're always searching for as CMMS vendors, is clients that understand what they're doing. Now, in that case, we were dealing with a client that knew exactly what they wanted, and they were very similar across those footprints, although there was some difference. Whereas others have to go one at a time. They have to go one at a time because they're each so unique.
It's good. Yeah. So that's almost like figure out unique versus uniform, and then that's going to help. You mentioned milestones being important. I like that concept. Give examples of what some of those milestones might look like. Is it number of users? Is it timeline? What are some of those milestones you think are helpful to kind of keep things moving?
Well, number one is whatever your initial deployment phase is. Let's just make a few assumptions. I know that's dangerous, but we're going to launch what we call sites. These are the locations, and then we're going to build those locations out according to what they are. What are the buildings? What are the floors or levels? What are the things in these different production areas and those assets? So a first really strong milestone that's going to tell you you're on the right track if you're deploying a CMMS or something similar is probably your asset hierarchy and your locations being set up. What goes along with that are things like service types, and maybe the descriptions of the preventive maintenance items, maybe some of the other kind of tertiary, secondary, and tertiary information that goes along with that. But your next milestone, aside from that initial setup phase, is user adoption. And you want to, like I said, start with administrators and then maintenance personnel. And you want to see where you're at on the use rate. Is everybody actually using the system? And then another milestone that often gets overlooked is the training steps. Have people gone through the training and have they used the training that they've gotten? So that has to be incorporated somewhere as a milestone. And these are all going to move around. They're going to get revisited later, but those are some initial milestones. And then after that, something that's maybe bigger is when you're starting to get important report data. You want to be able to validate the reports that are meaningful to you in that system that are telling you the information you thought it was going to tell you. You want to do a lot of that probably within the first 2 to 6 months, I would think.
Okay, that's good. I like having just that idea of like put milestones together, treat it like a project. And then it's not just, hey, you bought software, good luck. It's also not like, hey, everyone has to adopt this tomorrow. It's like, let's come up with a pretty thoughtful set of steps. You, again, I know you've having been in a CMMS company and now talking to many, I'm sure you're borderline an expert at this. When a company's thinking about adopting new software, new tools, what tips do you give them about building a business case? How do you quantify the value that you're going to get from a new software solution?
The most important part is identifying the value, the impact of the problem. If I'm an organization looking for a CMMS and I've verified that I need a CMMS because it's going to do this, that, or the other thing that relates to solving a problem, there has to be something quantifiable about that in revenue. And what you're really doing typically with these systems is eliminating waste. So waste can always be equated to revenue loss, and you can tie it to revenue gain. Maintenance in and of itself is a revenue contributor, a revenue enabler within all organizations of any type. And you have to be able to, when building that case, speak a couple of different languages, so to speak. And what I mean is you got to speak maintenance, of course, but you also have to understand what's happening in leadership and what they speak, what matters to them. So when building your business case for getting a platform, it has to make sense for the CFO, the CEO, the C-suite, and the boardroom. And they may understand the importance of maintenance and those activities, but it doesn't translate the same. They're moving a lot quicker. It's not as often that they're out there on the plant floor. So you got to speak in terms of what matters to them and what matters to leadership.
Now, let's say back to this business case example, I've already got a CMMS. Let's say it's pretty legacy. It's not very good. People can click the buttons and enter the data. And then there's like new whiz-bangy CMMS out there that's faster, better, cheaper, et cetera. How do you make the business case that switching from old legacy to new whiz-bang is going to actually help move the needle on those metrics? Because of course, that's what every CMMS company is arguing, that clicking our buttons is going to be better than clicking somebody else's buttons.
Well, first of all, when you put it that way, you have to, as a consumer, someone that's going to get a new system and potentially move away, open your eyes a lot wider. Your vendor that's selling you software is not always going to be focused on your needs. They're focused on selling software. And people might hate that I say that, but that's the truth. So if you're going to make a business case for switching to new, latest, and greatest from your legacy system, you have to be able to present the case that that legacy system is costing you, is hurting you, that you're leaving something on the table when it comes to your maintenance management. And that's something that you're leaving on the table has to be connected to money. So if we have a legacy system and we can click the buttons and they still work and it's 12 steps to create a work order and there's not a lot of value that we can measure or present in reducing that to 3 clicks, then you're probably not going to make a change or get support for making a change. If you can show that this is wasteful and that we have an advantage over here and that the legacy system is becoming cost prohibitive, we just can't see it because it's not the price of the software, it's the cost of using it or not using it. Now we're building that business case. But I also caution everyone, if you jump into the new, latest and greatest shiny stuff, unicorn farts and rainbows, it ain't a thing. It's not. Don't go for the shiny stuff. Go for the thing that actually makes sense for how you operate, what works for you. Don't change your working processes to match the CMMS that you're moving to or whatever technology. It should be the other way around. Those vendors need to understand you. So legacy systems can work. I hear stories about legacy systems that are so old. I'm shocked that they're still around, and I'll hear about a brand new deal where somebody got a system that's 25 years old. I'm like, wow, why did they do that? Because it fits exactly what they do. Well, then that makes sense.
Right. Well, and that's good. That's good to even say, hey, if you're going to make an argument based on clicks, you got to show how 12 to 3 actually is enhancing the business. Because if all it is like 12 to 3, there's no financial upside, then, hey, I might just have you click 12 buttons, right? It doesn't really.
And if you can show that there's disengagement over that you're not going to get frontline user input from that. Your frontline is the secret sauce when it comes to the value of technology. If you're not getting frontline data, if you're not getting the right inputs, you're not going to get the right outputs. Everybody says it, garbage in, garbage out. Well, less data is also similar to garbage in. You're just not getting a true snapshot of what's happening on the plant floor, throughout the facility, out on those land subdivisions and on those oil rigs. You've got to make that, I don't know if easier is the right word. It's just got to make sense. And 12 clicks does not make sense. Nobody has time for that crap.
Right.
Nobody.
Now our company specializes in root cause analysis. And so I feel like I need to ask at least one or two questions related to that. So as you are out there in the marketplace, as people are looking for CMMS solutions, as they're coming out on the market, where do you see RCA fitting within it? Where do you see it adding the most value? How relevant, I mean, I guess even at a higher level, how relevant do you see it in what companies are looking for, and where are you seeing the most value?
Well, root cause analysis is definitely a best practice that everyone should be incorporating to understand what's really causing their failures. And you have to have your failure modes or your failure codes, and that relates to the CMMS or the EAM or whatever technologies you're using. And the data that you're collecting in these platforms is going to be helpful and useful from an RCA perspective. The concern, though, is the data has to be contextual. You can perform RCA. You don't have to have a CMMS or an EAM or anything like that to have a reliable maintenance program, to have a reliable plant. You do not. Everybody knows that. Why do we then have systems? Is because we can now start to capture more data and find more opportunities for continuous improvement, because root cause analysis is so that you can eliminate defects, improve availability, increase availability of the machines we need to produce the things that we need to produce and sell, and blah, 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 blah. So RCA is actually a best practice at the heart of all of that. You can even do that if you want to apply it to whether we do or do not need a CMMS or an EAM. Don't you agree on that?
I think you're right on. I mean, I think, I would say, I think most people probably think of the CMMS as more foundational than, say, a root cause process. Now, obviously, because there's so much data out there nowadays, and you kind of do need to capture the data in order to apply it. But yeah, I would say I would agree with you for sure.
I try to be extra careful on those topics only because I don't have the credential, and I learned from a lot of others. I don't want to be a pretend expert. I want to give some clues and some guidance on that. And, obviously you guys are directly in the reliability space, whereas I'm kind of on the fringe, and I'm in and I'm out and I'm in and I'm out. So I want to be mindful of that for everybody listening.
Yeah, you're definitely an expert on connecting with people around a specific type of tool. And, I think with root cause analysis, we obviously build it so that it can connect with any CMMS that's out there, so that for us, it doesn't matter to us what your CMMS is, what your EMS is. We're happy to, effectively, quote, partner with that solution, because we just need data from it to help you explore problems and solve those problems.
Yeah, there it is. That was ideal. That's exactly what I was trying to say. That's the benefit of having the system.
Well, this has been great. I want to kind of leave you with one last kind of magic wand or piece of advice you give somebody. So as we wrap up, just what's maybe one piece of advice you'd give to somebody, whether it's leading a reliability team or a CMMS program, something you feel like, hey, here's what you really need to hear and let's, we can keep it focused on CMMS. Like, this is what you'd love people to hear before they waste a lot of time and money.
Spend time with your people. Be with your people on this project ahead of time, during, and after. You can't just stay behind your desk. You got to be amongst your people. You got to listen to them and work on the communication. And it's really that simple. The other thing is, none of this stuff happens in a vacuum. So you have to have strategies around not just why you're doing these things and going and getting these solutions, but you have to reinforce it. You have to stay connected to that process after you've deployed the system. And that, again, has to do with looking at the system, using the system for what you've asked your people to use it for, and going back and making sure everything is still on track. I hope that makes sense. I mean, there's so many ways we can cut this. I'll throw a third thing in there.
Sure.
When you're looking at solutions and you're talking to companies out there, ask them hard questions that put them in a situation where you will know if they understand you or not. It's all about understanding. Nothing else matters when it comes to somebody solving a problem for you. And if you're getting solutions, you're the customer. You're the one that's supposed to benefit more than anybody.
That's good. And I also, just as an aside, really liked how you got a Metallica song line in there with Nothing Else Matters. So that was also a good way to end that and provide the bookend to this conversation. That's really helpful advice. Again, Greg, thank you so much for being on this conversation today. I think this is going to be really useful for our audience. I hope even for your audience that this is helpful, as they often hear you asking the questions. I think it'll be fun for them to hear you give some of the answers. To everyone listening, again, we're about helping engineers and really anybody learn to take steps to bring technology to bear in their organization. We want this conversation to be practical. We hope that it's helpful as you think about like some of the topics we covered today, specifically around evaluating and rolling out software, which are so critical to the success of anything you do. Again, our company, reliability.com, specializes in root cause analysis. If that's helpful for you, we'd love for you to check out our software, Easy RCA. And we think it's a platform that can, again, really help you solve problems in your context. And for everybody, we're here to help make the world a more reliable place. So thank you for joining us. We will see you on the next episode. Again, Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
You got it, Sebastian. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks. Take care.